Welcome to the Educated Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Leah Kleonsky, and I know you're going to want to hear from the guest that I brought on today because this topic is something that all of us are concerned about, and that's how do we help our children develop a healthy relationship with food? And by healthy, I mean the kind of relationship where they're not going to develop an eating disorder later on. How do we help them feel good about food, and what are we supposed to do to make that process easier for them? So that's why I'm so excited to be here with Dr. Sehrish Ali. She is a psychologist and she's a licensed professional counselor supervisor and certified eating disorder specialist, and she's based in Houston, Texas. She's also the founder of Guided Growth Therapy, and she supports adolescents, adults, and families navigating eating disorders, which is why it's so amazing that she's here to discuss this with us. She also helps with identity development and high-functioning distress rooted in trauma and perfectionism. Drawing from years in clinical leadership and direct care, Dr. Ali blends compassion, curiosity, and evidence-based strategies to help clients and communities move towards deeper self-trust and body respect. So I am so glad you're here, Dr. Ali. Thank you for coming on Educated Parent.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you, especially since this episode is airing in January. And that's when there is so much talk about dieting and wellness, sort of like healthy behaviors that are sneaking into dieting. There's so much talk and we're exposed to it, and so are our kids.
Agreed. I think that is one of the bigger things. I work with a lot of adults, but it's both. It's the transference of adults struggling and with body image and food and how we're modeling that for kiddos. Sometimes I'll hear kids as young as 6 worried about their bodies or if they're eating good or bad foods, and how do we navigate some of these conversations with them is usually one of the bigger things that parents want to know about.
Does January and all of the diet talk and the New Year's resolution diet talk, does that trigger a lot of people that you work with when all of those ads come out and everyone's asking about New Year's resolutions?
Absolutely. I think that it's definitely there throughout the year, but I do think I'd say the New Year's and summers are usually the higher hot spots of the year. It's a reset for the year. And so I think that's when let's renew those gym memberships. Let's get back on these goals of losing X amount of weight because maybe that's the answer. And sometimes it's all with good intent of let's be quote unquote healthier is how we start some of these things and these conversations. And then they can turn into disordered eating really fast and short or just disordered behaviors.
Right. And I imagine too, as a parent, the message that you think you're sending to your child and the message that they're receiving could be entirely different. So if
Yeah.
you think like, I'm going to go to the gym more and take care of my body, and your child thinks that you're saying there's something wrong with your body and you have to fix it immediately or you're bad, then you're like what you're trying to put out there might not be what they're actually taking in.
Yeah, no, I think there's like this hidden harm of like health as a moral value that kind of comes into place. And so what it's translating healthy into good and then unhealthy is bad, right? And so then this is how we're internalizing health as worthiness. And that you can see take on a life of its own.
Right. If you tell people you're going to the gym all the time or you're eating healthy all the time,
Mhm.
people praise you, even if you're doing
Yes.
something unhealthy. Even if you're like, yes, I've stopped eating all of these food groups. People will praise you and your self-control, even if it's ultimately bad for your overall health.
Right. And I mean, as a kid, I guess you can think about how then health becomes like this proxy for like control or compliance or being a quote unquote good kid, right? If I'm healthy, then I'm good and mom and dad are happy with this, and how that can kind of again cycle into something different
Yeah.
than what was not the intentional purpose of even as a parent saying that to our kids.
I mean, I sometimes find that I'm not sure what to say. Well, so, like, after the holidays, there is so much sugar consumed. Like, the level of sugar consumed over Christmas and New Year's in my house is unparalleled for the rest of the year, especially with some grandparents contributing to that. Often in January, I'm thinking like we were excessive, right? We were like,
Right.
this was not actually a good thing. It was too much. We're too much in that lens. And now I want to pull back on some of the sugar. But I also don't
Mm,
want to send my kids this message that they were bad for eating the sugar in the first place,
right.
or that we now can't have it because then it becomes this like restrictive cycle where they're going to want it more. And I'm wondering if you are also seen people struggle in the new year because of times where you've gone the other direction too far.
Yeah, and I think, again, like we said, stocking stuffers, and we're going through Easter and Halloween, and like you said, there's so many aspects of it associated with it. It's that we don't want to get them into that restriction, which can then kind of increase that obsession, right? So this
Mhm.
idea that it's readily available. I'm sure if you notice, if kiddos go out and do the trick or treating, after a while, it's not exciting anymore. That Halloween candy kind of sits there if it's
Mhm.
just out and about. But if we say something like, oh, well, we can only have one piece and we can't have any more, or this has been too much, I feel like that can get a little bit restrictive. Some of the things we can definitely talk about is exactly what you said. Oh, well, we've had a little bit of candy this week. Why don't we try something different today? Or just
Mhm.
like we don't want our kids to be having dessert every day or two, but then also let them choose, of this idea of the balancing act, right? And letting the kids trust their bodies and to, I don't want this anymore, and it gets less exciting with time. And so I think it's not this forbidden fruit, for example, that kids need to assign that value to.
Yeah, whatever's forbidden becomes very attractive, even if it's not
Yeah.
something you like. If you tell anyone they can't have something, then they desperately want it.
Modeling is big about this. And so as we're moving into the new year, and we might have less candy sitting around, and that's okay. Or we might normalize it and just have candy bowls throughout the house. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's always interesting too, of always having those different options in the pantry or in the refrigerator and letting them decide what they are feeling that day. Because after the third day of choosing the same snack, you might notice that they might not want that anymore. And it gets boring just like anything else.
We tend to get scared as parents because we think if we make the sweets too accessible, our kids will
Mm,
always choose them. And I think maybe that's almost part of our own, I don't know, like indoctrination too with diet
mm,
culture, where it's like, well, I can't have this at the house or I will always eat it. And
mhm.
so we're like, we don't trust ourselves and we don't trust them. And we communicate this lack of trust kind of
Yeah,
intergenerationally.
I agree. I think it's the idea of like when we're standing in the supermarket in the chip aisle or the ice cream section, it's like, do I want to take this home or do I not? And kind of contemplating that. And I think take it home and let it sit if it needs to sit. Or if we finish it off earlier than expected, then questioning our own kind of insecurities around food and thoughts around that and what we're passing on, I think is usually helpful in this case too. But I think you bring up a really good point of we mirror that for sure intergenerationally for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I notice, like even with my husband, where he was always raised where he was allowed to have dessert. And even to this day, there can be ice cream that sits in our freezer for months and he
Yeah.
won't eat it. Not because he's depriving himself, but he's just not interested in it. He'll stop midway through like a gooey chocolate chip cookie because he's full, and which is very hard for almost anybody else to do. But I think it's because he knows he could just get another cookie. And so there's something about not being worried about it not being there that it doesn't trigger for him. And I'm envious, to be honest.
I think then the question is what again, like why aren't we experiencing more of those things? Why aren't we putting ourselves through these exposures and seeing where that is and where our trust with those foods are? And I do think that, and again, it's all love-based fear, right? It's one of those of, hey, we're not fully sure of this might have taken a toll of its own. There is this idea of emotional eating. Am I passing this on? Is this going to pass on? And I think those are very real fears. And I think part of it is just experiencing it with your kids, sitting with them in those roller coasters around that and seeing where it takes us, I think.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to just let something happen, especially
Yeah.
when you're the kind of parent who listens to Educated Parent and you're trying to
Yeah.
make good decisions for your kids, right? You're listening because you're
Sure.
trying to be proactive and get expert advice and help your child have a great childhood and a healthy adulthood. And so we
Yeah.
want knowing when to intervene, when not to intervene, knowing when to trust
Mm.
ourselves and our kids, when to back off. It's like I feel like the central dilemma of parenting at its
Yeah.
core, and it shows up with healthy and unhealthy quote unquote foods.
Sure. And again, most of our experiences are so intertangled with food, whether it be celebration, like there's a cake when there's a birthday or something exciting. But why can't we just have cake because it's a Wednesday, right? Even if it's the healthy pieces of, oh, well, vegetables are even in cartoons or even in younger childhood are seen as, oh, that's not the thing I want. The character might not be wanting to eat it, but I might like carrots or broccoli or a certain vegetable. And I think it's just really important to have that exposure to all foods and then seeing where the kids lean. And I think, like you said earlier, Leah, is the fear that, well, is my kid always going to choose the sugary option, the very desserty option? Will they actually choose the other thing? And the reality is yes.
Mhm.
They are, because their bodies physiologically, they need to be able to trust their bodies, and their bodies are going to tell them that, hey, this sounds good. You need this. Just like when we say you've been playing outside for too long, you need more water. And they will get thirsty for those other things too. And I think we just gotta, that's where the physiological responses do come in for, and we just gotta let them kick in. There's something called intuitive eating, where it's this idea of, if I have a pizza or whatever set out, I'm gonna allow my kiddo to have one slice or three, or leave half a slice on the plate, and let them decide of how hungry they are, what hunger means to them, instead of saying, oh, we have to finish this, or, and just rephrasing that to, how's that feel in your body right now? If you're eating a little less or eating a little bit
Right.
more, or having more conversation around it. I think that's the way to kind of navigate some of these food conversations with our kids. And I don't think that there's ever too early of a sign to do that, to just kind of ask, hey, how's that feel?
Yeah, last night actually my 4-year-old asked why we couldn't just have only dessert for dinner. And I
Yeah.
said to him, I said, honestly, I've tried that before and I felt awful. And I don't want you to feel awful. I was like, I ate too much dessert and I felt full, but I also felt kind of sick and also
Yeah.
still a little bit hungry. And it hurt my tummy. And I don't want you to have a hurt tummy. And I don't think you would enjoy that feeling. And he said, okay. But I think if I had said to him, well, it's because dessert isn't good for you. If I'd given an example, I think where it was like, no, this is like bad food and you have to eat the
Mhm.
good food, then I maybe wouldn't have sent a message that I wanted to. But I think about it a lot. I want my kids
Yeah.
to live in to feel good in their bodies, and I also don't want them to be afraid of food.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right, give us some strategies because all of us parents are lost. What are three things
Yeah.
we can do?
Well, I think one of the main things that we really want to focus on is just dropping this idea of good and bad food labels, right? Instead
Okay,
of saying that's junk or this is healthy, what you just said with that great conversation you had with your kiddo just last night, and try neutral language. Like, this food gives you energy, or this one helps you feel full longer, if we're talking about certain foods like maybe proteins or whatnot. And it teaches kids that all foods can kind of fit, and that their worth isn't necessarily tied to what's on their plate just in that minute or that day.
right. It's kind of like how adults will like you'll eat something and you'll say, "Oh, I'm being so bad," and it's we're
Yes.
sending a message even when we say that as a joke, like I am, like I'm bad because I ate cake, and so it's
Right.
taking that language. What I'm hearing is that we're taking the language out. So if your kids eats cakes, if your kid eats cake, it's neutral. They just ate
Yeah.
the cake.
They just ate the cake. Yeah.
Yeah. And if they eat broccoli, they just happen to eat the broccoli. It's just food is food.
Yeah, and again, and it goes the other way around too. If they finish their vegetables, or they finish their broccoli or carrots or whatever, it doesn't need to be praised necessarily. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
just like the other day, and sometimes it can also be seen as, oh, because the vegetables is a good food, and that's why I'm being praised because I finished it. But I didn't get praised for finishing my potatoes or my whatever else, my French fries or my cake for that matter. And I think sometimes we inadvertently may add some of that value to it too. So kind of just keeping all food neutral, really.
Actually, my daughter is obsessed with broccoli. I don't know why. She wants to eat it multiple times a week. I don't particularly care for broccoli. And we were at the grocery store one day. She's begging for broccoli. Please, mommy,
Hilarious.
can we have broccoli? And I'm sitting
Oh.
there saying to her, I don't want any more broccoli, Ella. Can we please get something else? And this man, this stranger I've never met, walked up to me and he said, what is wrong with you? So I told him, I said, you have a point, but you don't know how much broccoli I've been
You don't know
forced
I've
to
had
eat.
how much this week, yes.
But it was the opposite conflict you would ever have. But really, there's only so much broccoli I feel like anyone should be forced to eat in a week.
Agreed, agreed.
All right, what's the second strategy? We're going to keep food talk neutral. What's the second
Sure.
one?
Watch how you talk about your own body. A lot of this, like you talked about with the beginning of the year, diet culture, being a smaller body, losing X amount of weight. Kids notice everything. And
Mhm.
if they hear you saying something on like, I need to lose weight, or I feel gross, or they learn to evaluate themselves the same way. One thing I say is try shifting to gratitude, maybe. So my body lets me move, play, and like even hug you. And it's really not about like perfection. It's really about molding this respect that we have for bodies. And so even taking things that we might think that are positive, like, oh, you're so thin, or you look so XYZ thing, taking that away and taking it away from bodies just in general, because that, again, staying neutral about it and how we're talking about food and recognizing the transference, kind of what we talked about earlier, the intergenerational aspects of that.
That makes so much sense. So it's not just keeping that neutrality in how we talk to our kids about their food, but
Yeah.
also being aware that they are watching us. And if we make self-deprecating comments about our dietary choices or our bodies in front of them, they're going to pick up on it because they are smart little kids and they are watching us all the
They
time.
are all the
Yeah.
time, more than we might know and think.
Perfect. All right. And what's the third strategy you would recommend so that our kids have a healthy relationship with food?
Yeah, I'd say prioritizing kind of connection over control. We've talked a little bit about it's easy to stress about what our child's eating, but the real goal is really helping them feel safe with food. So instead of forcing bites and getting curious of, hey, are you full or is something else going on when they're
Mhm.
not eating their meal? Or I feel like when kids just feel understood, they learn to trust their bodies. And that's the foundation we're trying to build for sustainability and lifelong health. Like you mentioned yesterday when your son had this question of, hey, why can't we just have dessert for this entire meal? And it's that conversation and connecting over, hey, here's the experience I had with it. And so I think that that's one great launching pad from it.
Okay, so that's really helpful to think about. I'm glad that I handled that well. Thank you. I'm really hearing what you're saying about not getting into a control battle as much about it and more explaining some reasoning or like just the logic behind things that can be helpful. I know we get scared if our kids aren't eating well in the way that we think they should as well, partially
Mhm.
because their mood is dependent upon it. So if we watch them only eat 3 cookies, we think you're gonna have a meltdown in 15 minutes. And so I think part of that gets also encompassed in all of this too.
Yeah. You know what you said earlier, this is not my specialty. And so even like model repair language, like I realized what I said might have sounded like food was bad and just saying, I want to clarify, I'm learning too. And I think because we're always learning, right, about foods and just more about ourselves. And so I think that's a great way to check in as well.
What would you do, like, if you were watching a child eat 3 cookies and nothing else, and you thought, not so much this is bad for them, but more they're going to have a negative reaction because they'll be hungry versus and sugary? What
Yeah.
would you say to a child in a moment like that?
I think I'd say something like, it seems like we didn't eat any of our other parts of our meals if it's lunchtime and if they have other
Mhm.
parts of the meals. It's like, hey, maybe we can save one of these for later and try some of these other things and really focusing on that balance. But in general, if it's like, hey, if they've eaten the third cookie and that was their serving size and that's what they had, it's okay. And saying, hey, we have these other meals. It looks like you haven't eaten anything else. You might get hungry later. Here are some other options if you are, and creating that flexibility around that. I think that's one of those things where, again, not using that shaming language of, oh my gosh, you ate so many, and really just saying, okay, it looks like we enjoyed these cookies. That's great. We still got to eat other parts of this meal. So we have a more balanced meal. What can we eat more of? What are you still hungry for? What can we try eating? Or let's save this for later because it looks like you might get hungry later.
Yeah, so it's not the panicking over, it's like our own anxiety comes in. So it's not, oh no, they had 3 cookies, they didn't have anything else. And then parents start panicking. It's more of a, okay, where do we go from here without making this seem like a terrible choice? And the idea that if they get hangry in 30 minutes, I still have the turkey sandwich they didn't touch. So that's still available.
Exactly. And I think that creates that flexibility for them at an early age of knowing that, okay, I had this, now this is what happens later.
I love this. I think this is so actionable. I'm thinking right now about things I'm going to make sure that I say and don't say to
Mm.
keep this kind of healthy relationship with food conversation going. And I think that this resource that you have is so helpful for adolescents and adults and families who are trying to navigate this together. And I'm so glad that you provide this kind of help. Where can families reach you? Or where, if this is triggering you as a parent and you're thinking, I need to work on myself here because it's sneaking in with my kids, where can they contact you?
Yeah. Well, I have a private practice out here in Houston, Texas, Guided Growth PLC. We'll leave the link down for you for the website. So they can definitely contact me there. All the fun information's on there to contact me through email and phone, and would love to have a conversation with anyone that is interested to continue this conversation.
Amazing. All right. Well, I'm so glad you came on the show. I'm so glad that you talked about this topic that is applicable to every single human because all of us eat. And for those of you listening, check back in with us next week. Feel free to contact Dr. Ali if she can give you this kind of help and support. And I will talk to you next time.